Welcome to my video on using the Plotter post-processing app to decompose designs. We'll be covering the various functions that the deCompose app can accomplish for us, and some different examples of things you might use it for. So let's go ahead and launch the Plotter post-processing app. We're going to find the repository where you checked out Plotter post-processing. We're going to open this in terminal, say Python main application.py, and we're actually going to use this same design that I used. This might look familiar if you watched the occult video. We're just going to download this, open that up in our Plotter post-processing application. So we're going to use the deCompose application in launch by clicking deCompose. And this is what that window looks like. So we have some information at the top here. So it says one file selected, an input width of about 4 inches by 4 inches, and there are 2 colors found in the file. So the number of colors found in the file will show up with the different layers here. So the assumption is that we're using stroke color to parse this file, and therefore removing layer 1 or removing layer 2 would remove one of those 2 color layers. So let's just show what the output is. This is without actually running anything in particular here. So you see we have this kind of cutout shape here, this red shape over the top of this black shape. So you can find out which layer is which by going to this menu option in the upper left corner here. You see the layers. So it's layer 1 and layer 2. So if we get rid of layer 1, the layer 1 is black and layer 2 is red. And the way that vpipe works, whatever the first thing it reads into vpipe, and this is based on the drawing order of the SVG, that becomes layer 1. vpipe starts counting at 1 for its layers and just keeps on adding them. So we're parsing it by stroke. So we've got red and we've got black layers. And so the black layers become layer 1, and everything that's black gets put into layer 1, and everything that's red gets put into layer 2. So if we wanted to remove just that layer 2, we could just check this box here, remove layers, layer 2. We can show what that looks like. There it is. So we're just left with the black layer. We've got 1 layer in this, and that's it. So you could just say confirm, and in the folder where you received or where you input your file from, you'll see that we now have 2 files. We've got the initial file, and then we've got one with an underscore DE capital C at the end of it. And that stands for deCompose. So just like all other functions in the Plotter post-processing app, we do not overwrite the original file, but instead we create a new file with the underscore of whatever function was used to create it. So you can kind of see step by step as you go through the various applications that this is what's been created. And also worth noting, our currently loaded files has changed from being the input file here to the decomposed file here. So Plotter post-processing always takes output of the previous step as the input for whatever next step you might do. So maybe you would load up the process step after this. So in the deCompose app, there are really 3 different options we have, and they are at this time not compatible with each other, and it's not that well explained on the UI, and so that's something I'll work to improve on future versions. But basically, there are 3 different things you can do. You can either remove layers, or you can separate designs into different layers, or you can create separate files from the different layers that you have. So when you want to remove layers, the expectation is that we're parsing it by stroke. When you're separating design into different N layers, the expectation is we're treating it as each line as its own entity, and we're actually sorting by the attribute D and the attribute point so that each line gets input into its own separate layer. And then lastly, the separate into SVG files, this is again using the stroke method for sorting these. So let me show you, I guess, what I mean by doing all 3 of those. So we already removed the layer, the red layer, from this design. So right now we're left with just this black layer. So if we want to separate it into different layers, perhaps you want to take this design and do multiple different pen colors. We could say, let's separate it into two different uniform layers. And this min line length in inches is just kind of a filter that's attached. You can set that to 0 if you don't want that to be applied. So let's say uniform, 2 layers, show output. So you can see in here we have 2 different layers, and it just alternates. So each shape gets loaded into its own layer and then put into 2 separate layers. And so you can see if I remove layer 1, that's the pink. If I remove layer 2, that's the red. And basically it just takes turns with the shapes as it loads them in and sticks them into different layers. So I could increase this number to 10 different layers if I wanted to. Now we have 10 different layers, and you've got this kind of rainbow effect here. And you can see, each of these is a different one, and then it repeats as it gets back to after the 10th layer. These are all random colors. These colors are generated such that it will not overlap with any of the existing colors in the file, but it will also override the existing colors in the file. So you'll see we don't have any black in here, but the input file was in fact black. Instead of uniform, you can also split by distance. So if you said, what's the we'll leave it at 20. I think this will work okay. So here we have 10 different layers, and every 20 inches, it switches to a different layer. So you got this dark green is the first one, and the split distance function waits until the end of a line has been completed. So it's going to complete this entire circle shape, even if it goes above 20 inches. And once it goes above 20 inches and completes the circle shape, it'll move on to the next one. And so you get each of these, and you'll see that, there's fewer and fewer rings as you travel out, because 20 inches is a lot easier to accomplish when you're drawing these larger kind of swaths. But again, the colors repeat, so you've got this dark green over here, you've got the dark green over here, and you got the dark green over here. So here's 10 different layers. Instead of uniformly, instead of every other, we now have by distance. So you can change that distance to be whatever you want. And then you can also split it into a more, precise sections by using the split all command. And that actually takes each ring in this design and splits it into constituent lines, and then is a lot more accurate about once it hits 20 inches. But it won't, I'll show you here, it doesn't care about completing the line anymore, and so you get this little blip here. So perhaps if you're painting something, or perhaps if you need to prime your paint pens or something like that, if you're drawing with like a Posca, this might be useful where exactly, you've gone exactly 20 inches, and here's where it breaks off into a different layer. So that just means that you're not going to get the entire shape finished, but you're going to get closer to the exact 20 inches of what you, or whatever length you input there. So let's do uniform. Let's do 5 layers, and let's show that. Looks great. Let's save that by hitting confirm. And you can see in here, now we're just stacking this underscore DEC on top of the underscore DEC, because we took this initial, here, let me refresh this. We've got this initial file here. We decomposed to get rid of the red, and then we decomposed again to make it to split into different layers. And again, that newest output is now our input. So we could just return to decompose if we want to. You can see we have the 5 different layers here. You could remove a few different layers if you wanted to. Now you're left with this. Or you could separate those into separate file outputs. And show won't work with the separate file outputs because it's actually in the writing to the file system step. And so you won't see this, but you'll know what different files you'll get by Just kind of like looking at these layers here and saying this is going to be one file. And they're just going to be numbered from 0 to, in this case, 4, because there are 5 layers. So if I just hit confirm, you'll see that we now have a bunch more files down here. And we expand this out. We've got 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we've got 5 different files here. And again, in the Plotter post-processing app, we have all 4 of these, or all 5 of these files currently loaded. And that's basically it for the deCompose application. Just as a refresher, you can do essentially 3 different things with this app. You can remove layers. So I can remove the red layer here, or we can split it into different design layers, or we can separate it into different files. Now, separate files. So, those are the 3 different things you can do in deCompose. If you found this video useful, please consider supporting me on Patreon. Thank you.